With the new NHL season on the horizon, the Kings are getting ready to start the preseason in Australia. We welcome in Jesse Cohen from the All the Kings Men podcast to talk about the Kings offseason, the upcoming season as well, on this episode of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And of course, we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, the weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. We are 9 days away from the Kings preseason opener in Australia and the opening of training camp. Kings rookies have gathered in El Segundo, getting ready to take part in the rookie face-off on Las Vegas. That starts tomorrow. It is starting to feel like hockey season again. And to help us get ready for what we hope will be an exciting and eventful season, we welcome in the host of the All the Kings Men podcast, the official podcast of the LA Kings. He is Jesse Cohen. And I know, Jesse, it is a busy day for you today. Really appreciate you giving us some of your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been a busy week so far.
Well, we have not spoken since shortly after the Kings were eliminated for the second straight season in the playoffs by the Oilers. And I want to get back to something that you said heading into the offseason. I'm sure you remember it vividly. But you said this offseason was going to be far more important than anything that happened during the season on the ice. I am far more curious to see what will happen over the next 3 months. Well, we've had the next 3 months. And obviously, I want to get your thoughts on specifically a few things, but generally, overall, what do you think about what GM Rob Blake has done to reshape this roster over the last 3 months?
I do remember saying that, actually. And it's funny because it's been about 2 months since anything has happened. It's hard to sort of put myself back in that mindset. But this is going to sound like a cop-out, but one of the reasons I said that was that I felt that Rob Blake and the organization had done a really excellent job of painting itself into a corner and then always sort of finding a way out of that corner. And this season, I didn't think it would be possible, but they painted the corner even tighter. So now I've got to say, like, next offseason will be even more, curious, because the Pierre-Luc Dubois thing, obviously, it was a huge trade, moving out Cal Peterson, Sean Walker, Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari, Gabriel Velarde, right? Like the Gabriel Velarde contract issue was going to be a huge thing that impacted how all the other decisions were made. Don't have to worry about it because he gets traded. But then Pierre-Luc Dubois comes in, signs a new contract. Now that contract sets all of the terms for everything else. So I think it was a monumental summer, but I don't think it was as definitive as I thought it might be.
Well, for what it's worth, I think most fans out there, and maybe you're included in this, thought the two most important items of business were re-signing Vladislav Gavrikov or someone like him to play on the second pairing on the left side, and re-signing Jonas Korpisalo or someone like him to address the situation in net. And we'll get into what the Kings did in that regard in a moment. But what I did not see coming, and I don't know if you did either, was the Kings going out and signing Pierre-Luc Dubois, a highly regarded, maybe somewhat controversial, young, talented center, to strengthen this team down the middle. Thoughts on that move by Rob Blake, who has shown he's not afraid to do something maybe a bit outside the box, maybe a bit off the radar, in an attempt to make this team better?
So first of all, I want to apologize for the last time I came on, because I don't think I was a particularly great guest, because I felt like I didn't say anything. I felt like I was, and I actually read some of the comments on the appearance and saw some of your viewers and listeners agree with me that I came across a bit afraid to say anything. So with that in mind, the Pierre-Luc Dubois thing could be great or it could be catastrophic. If Pierre-Luc Dubois comes in and is the player that they think he is and want him to be, it could be an unbelievable move to secure the depth for the franchise 8 years down the line if they successfully navigate Quentin Byfield's future where he translates from wing to center someday. It could be great. If he struggles to find chemistry with anybody, if the combination of Dubois and Fiala doesn't work and you now have to reimagine what your lines look like, if he just fails to play up to the standard that he had been, you've now locked yourself in for 8 years on a contract that isn't franchise sinking, but is complicating the cap system. However, what I thought you were going to say you didn't expect was the email I just got that you and I spoke about just prior to hitting the record button. So if you don't mind, I can read you the first 2 paragraphs. I think you and your viewers and listeners will be very happy with the news.
Please, by all means, it is very rare that we have breaking news here on Locked On LA Kings. So I am very excited for you to break the news for us.
The LA Kings today released their regular season television schedule for the 2023-24 season. The schedule features 63 regular season games for the upcoming campaign on Bally Sports West and 6 games on and 6 games on KCAL TV Channel 9, with 13 additional games nationally televised. This year's broadcast schedule provides expanded reach for Kings fans across multiple broadcast and streaming outlets. And the release has additional information, which by the time people see this, I'm sure will have been covered on Twitter and other social media.
Well, yes, that was certainly on my list of questions to ask you. I honestly, I didn't think I'd get an answer, but I had to ask the question. So it's great to know, because I have been concerned over the lack of news and wondered what's going on and how this is going to play out. But so basically for Kings fans, nothing has changed from last year. We've added an extra year with Bally's, and then we'll address what's going forward after that. So good news that things have not changed, at least for the upcoming season, and how Kings fans can watch the LA Kings on TV.
And if I could add one other additional note
Please.
From the press release that involves me personally.
Sure.
On the LA Kings iHeartRadio audio network, Jesse Cohen serves as host of Kings Talk, which is heard after every Kings game. The show begins at the conclusion of the game with Cohen taking calls from listeners as part of the popular program.
Very nice.
Result of the simulcast, I will be stepping in for Nick pregame, postgame, and on intermissions.
All right. Well, congratulations with that. I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job with that. So we've got something to add to your resume when we introduce you here on the show and elsewhere. So, all right. Thank you very much for the heads up on that breaking news. And I am very sure that most of our listeners are very excited to get some clarity on that situation. Kind of back to the off season for the LA Kings. Believe me, I'm very happy to get that news.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked about what I thought were the 2 pressing needs for the Kings going to the off season. They do, in fact, re-sign Vladislav Gavrikov, which I was not optimistic they would be able to do. So I'm very excited to see a full season of him with the Kings. As far as the goaltending situation, they add in veteran Cam Talbot, which seems like a Band-Aid type move, certainly for the LA Kings. The long-term answer in net certainly is not Cam Talbot, but we're focused on this season. We'll worry about down the road. Your thoughts on being able to re-sign Gavrikov, getting him for a full season, and really having that situation stabilized now, and the addition of Cam Talbot along with Phoenix Copley for this year?
I think the Gavrikov signing is great. I think Gavrikov was sort of a perfect example of some of the shortcomings of the analytic, not the analytics movement. I really think the analytics movement is great. I think there's tremendous value in it, but I think it's a really good sign of why analytic media needs to catch up, because when the people were talking about who the Kings should acquire at the deadline, everybody knew they wanted size and defense on the second lefty position. There were a bunch of social media accounts or articles written, by The Athletic or whatever that said, here's who they should get. And Gavrikov was sort of, here's why they shouldn't get him. Here's why he's not what they're looking for. And of course, the thing that analytics reporters can never really answer is, well, why is it the way it is? Is it a bad system? Is it a bad team? Is it, incorrect deployment? And Gavrikov showed up and instantly translated everything, all of the strengths in his game into helping the Kings, and all of the weaknesses or shortcomings that had previously been identified didn't really matter. So he was sort of tailor-made for what the Kings needed, and he gave them exactly what they wanted. So bringing him back is fantastic. It solidifies that second pair, Gavrikov and Roy. You have your top pair of Anderson and Doughty. So, and the notion that he wanted to test free agency, which was something I bought into 100%. I had heard it repeated that he was, not going to sign a contract before testing the free agent waters. Turns out that wasn't true. The size of the contract wasn't a problem until the Pierre-Luc Dubois contract was signed, because as we've said, and many people have said many times, the cap is tight and every available dollar just pushes you closer to it. But to your second point of the goaltenders, I guess I'd be curious to know what you mean by a Band-Aid for Cam Talbot. My personal goaltending philosophy has always been that in any given season, there's only ever between 3 and 8 players, goaltenders that is, that actually matter. And you can set the list however you want in any given year. But generally speaking, you can sort of sum it up and be like, all right, Vasilevsky matters, Shesterkin matters, Sorokin, I guess, and then if you want to include guys like UC Saros, you can. But as soon as you get to, 4 or 5 names down the list, you start getting into those names where people might quibble with you. So if you're not going to have one of the guys that absolutely matters, why not be the 32nd team in cap space devoted to goaltenders?
Well, especially from where they were a year ago at this time.
Yeah. But going into the last season was sort of a perfect example, right? Like Quick and Peterson, nobody expected them to be as bad as they were last year, but nobody expected them to be great. Nobody expected that the Kings would have 2 Vezina trophy, candidates on the roster. But you're spending over $10 million, and this year they're spending whatever it is, 2 million, 2.5. But again, if you're not going to get Shesterkin or Vasilevsky, then yeah, I'm not sure why you would tie your hands with cap space. The problem is if you do wind up drafting a guy that turns into that guy, you want to have the flexibility to lock him up, but we're not in that scenario. So as long as Talbot and Copley and or Riddick can deliver adequate goaltending, I'm not worried about it. I understand why it's considered not a strength. I understand why some people list it as a weakness or are concerned about it, but I'm not actively worried about it until I see it struggle.
Yeah, I think the Band-Aid comment is just, I think a lot of people were looking for the Kings to kind of solve that question now and for a few years down the road, not just for one season and then we go through it again. But look, Vegas, how many goalies did Vegas play last year? 4 or 5? They won the Stanley Cup. So yeah, I do agree with what you're saying. If you can't have a Vezina caliber trophy goaltender, then I think you can get by with building a good team around a good goalie, not a great goalie. And obviously Vegas was an example of being able to do that and have success.
This is a rough example to use, but it's the one that pops into my head. In 2011, I guess it was the offseason, Philadelphia decided they needed a goalie, right? They needed that goalie. So they traded Carter and Richards to make room for Brizgalov. Well, Brizgalov wasn't a guy that mattered. As good as he ever played, it was always because of the team he was on. It was clearly never because he was one of those guys that mattered. And they shipped out their captain and, Jeff Carter, who went on to score 400 goals after he left. Teams are constantly rolling the dice on these goalies that at the end of the day, in my mind, they don't matter. They're just a guy. And some of them were fine and some of them are really good and some of them,
Well, the Kings had their second most points and second most wins last year, and they had Phoenix Copley in that. And that's not a slight on Phoenix Copley, but it's an example of exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
We're going to have more with Jesse Cohen in a moment. Going to talk about this upcoming season and how important it is for the LA Kings head coach. We'll do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, this episode is brought to you by Jase Medical, who provide a product called the Jase Case. It can supply you with 5 life-saving antibiotics in case of an emergency. All you have to do is fill out a simple online form and in some cases make a quick call to their board-certified physicians to be prepared with antibiotics in case of an emergency. You also get ongoing care from their physicians or any treatment-related questions, so don't get caught unprepared. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Jase handles everything from online evaluations to licensed pharmacy medication deliveries and ongoing consultation and care. Save more than $360 by getting those life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout at jasemedical.com. That's JASE jasemedical.com. All right, we have more with Jesse Cohen, the host of the LA Kings official podcast, All the Kings Men. There he is. Jesse, head coach Todd McClellan is going into the final year of his contract. And Rob Blake has always struck me as a guy who likes to get things done as early as possible, whether it's at the deadline or signing free agents. So my guess is if he was going to extend McClellan, he would have done it by now. Now he still could do it before the season starts. But your thoughts on Todd McClellan going into this season, perhaps coaching for his future?
Yeah, I think you're right. If an extension was coming, it does seem like the sort of thing that would have been wrapped up by now. I haven't heard anything or talked to either of them about it, obviously. As far as him being a lame duck or coaching for an extension, when they hired him, I always sort of, in the moment, I should say, I always assumed that the hire was more about establishing a culture out of chaos, right? So Stevens gets fired in that 18-19 season. Willie Desjardins comes in, chaos all season long, tumultuous exit interviews. The wheels had come off and the organization appeared to have sort of utterly lost its identity from those cup winning teams. And it felt to me in the moment like anybody they hired, regardless of who it was, would need to be hired to a long-term deal with a sizable contract behind them, just to tell the players, you have managed to wrestle control of the organization away from the coaching staff and the management, but that cannot continue. Whoever you are, whatever you think it is that you deserve or are going to demand, an adult is now in charge of the organization. And it wound up being Todd McClellan at 5 years, $5 million. I don't remember if it was the highest paid contract for a coach at the time, but I think it might be now. Since then, he got the team turned around a lot faster than I expected. And regardless of how the organization fared in the playoffs, which was disappointing both years, I don't think that on the whole, his tenure has been a disappointment. So while I think any coach could be fired in the middle of, if the season starts terribly, if we're staring down Christmas or Thanksgiving and they're, sub 500, if they're like a 250, 300 winning percentage, sure, I wouldn't be surprised if changes start happening drastically. But if we have a repeat of last season or the season prior, I could imagine that if Todd McClellan wanted an extension, there would be one available for him.
Well, going into the season, I know that we've talked about, the Kings penalty kill being something that needs to be addressed. That's obvious. But you look at training camp, which obviously is about to get going here. A lot of things are pretty settled. There's not, a lot of battles as far as positions, maybe fourth line wing, but you've got familiar names there. Trevor Lewis is back, Carl Grunstrom, Jared Anderson-Dolan. And then the third pairing on defense, especially the left side, appears to be open for competition. So it will be a lineup we're very familiar with, and the addition of Pierre-Luc Dubois. But is there anything intriguing for you when we talk about the projected lineup for this year?
I mean, the third pair defense is the number one item, right? I couldn't tell you if it's going to be Clark or Spence. I couldn't tell you if it's going to be Bjornfot or Englund. I can tell you I think it's going to come down to those four players. Last year, I think it was, we had Jarrett Stoll on All the Kings Men before the season, and he made a comment about them wanting or expecting Bjornfot to play. I can't remember how many games he said, but the implication was that Bjornfot would be there all season. So heading into last season, I just thought, oh, well, if Jarrett Stoll and the development staff want Bjornfot to play a ton of games, I guess he'll be playing a ton of games. And obviously he did not. So I've stopped trying to take any sort of lessons from the conversations I have with the development staff, because the development staff doesn't make the decisions. Ultimately, those decisions are made by the coaching staff. And the fact that Englund and Bjornfot and Spence and Clark are all headed to Australia suggests to me that they don't have a decision made. And I, have my own personal preference over Spence versus Clark. I think it probably runs counter to what most people think, although I think both players have a tremendous ceiling, and I'm excited to see both of them. That's the big story for me. The second one is, who's Pierre-Luc Dubois going to play with? Because it makes sense, and I've seen, releases not from the team, but from independent media that place Fiala, Dubois, and Kaliev on a line together. And when I, have my own personal notes, that's the pairing that I go with, just because it's easy. Because we know Byfield played well with Kopitar and Kempe, and we know the nice line works well together. And Grunstrom, Lizotte, and Lewis make sense. And Jared Anderson-Dolan makes the most sense as a 13th forward. I don't put a ton of stock in the conversations about Alex Laferriere or Samuel Fagemo or Alex Turcotte or any of those guys somehow pulling an upset to make the team. It's possible, obviously, but I just think the amount of ice time they're going to get in the preseason and the amount's not the right. Like, they'd have to be so impressive in such a short period of time to leap over guys who have established identities and roles. It just doesn't seem likely to me. So for me, the biggest questions are that third pair, which is totally up for grabs on defense, and what will the actual lineup look like as far as, line mates.
Obviously, there's going to be a spotlight on Pierre-Luc Dubois, being the big new addition, being locked up long-term. Anyone else, though, that you're kind of looking at as far as someone, I don't know, having a breakout year or taking a significant step or a bounce-back season? Anyone that you're really curious to see as far as this season coming up?
I think Quentin Byfield's going to have an amazing season. And I'm really personally can't wait to sort of rub it in a bunch of people's faces. I think
they would be willing to take it, frankly, if that does happen. I hope so.
I mean, I hope so too. I would like to believe that everybody just wants the Kings to do well at the end of the day. But yeah, you'd remember when we acquired Phil Deneau, and there were a bunch of people, who would point out like, oh, he's only ever scored 5 goals. And then his first season with the Kings, what did he have? 27 or something like that. I am expecting Quentin Byfield to make the 3-goal comment a thing of the past. And I don't anticipate that he will exceed the gentleman who was drafted after him in that draft as far as points, but I expect that he will play better than him in a more meaningful role, even though he may not have as many points.
A little bit more with Jesse Cohen. Going to talk about some of the future pieces of the LA Kings who will be in action soon. We'll do that here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, be sure to check out Locked On NHL. It's your daily show to keep you updated on everything going on in the National Hockey League. Locked On NHL on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. We are wrapping it up with the host of the All the Kings Men podcast and your host for Kings Talk after games this season. That is Jesse Cohen. The Kings rookies have gathered in El Segundo. Saw the pictures and video. I know you're there of them skating around as they get ready to head to Vegas to start the rookie face-off tomorrow. I know that you just released a new episode of the All Kings Men podcast. You interviewed Ontario Reign head coach Marco Sturm, talking about, some of the future pieces of the LA Kings. We've kind of mentioned Brandt Clarke a little bit. And if you want to get on board as far as where you think he's going to start, you can certainly do that. But any of the young pieces that'll be at the rookie camp, maybe not for this season, but guys that you're interested in seeing this year, either in Ontario or back with their junior teams to keep an eye on this year.
Cohen Zemer, and not just because his last name or his first name sounds like my last name, I should say. But I don't have the quote in front of me, but there's a quote that we drove into the ground after he was drafted that basically said something along the lines of a Cohen Zemer shift is like draped in violence, essentially was the point of it. And
sounds intriguing.
Yeah, no, it was great. I wish I could remember. It was really well written. But the gist of it is he gets away with all sorts of rough and tumble play. And, we had Mark Yannetti on to talk about him, and he had glowing things to say about him. He'll be in Vegas for these 3 games. Then he'll probably go back to the CHL. He doesn't have an entry-level contract yet. Jacob Dvorak is a player. He signed his entry-level contract. He's from Czechia. So I think theoretically he could play in Ontario this year, but he has a European assignment clause in his entry-level contract. So if he is cut from the Kings training camp, he can return to Czechia. He's 6'5", and I don't think I've ever seen this before. The independent scouting, body of scouting, don't like his skating, and we're not shy about it, right? We had Scott Weeks? Sorry, Scott. Scott Wheeler, excuse me. Get Weeks and Wheeler mixed up, on the podcast, and he was like aggressively complaining about Dvorak's skating. We had Christian Rutu and Mark Yannetti on, who both came on and said, we don't understand that at all. His skating's great. So I'd be very curious to see how his career pans out, just because it's such an odd disagreement between independent and professional evaluators. Obviously, Eric Portillo is a huge question mark. He's really the only goalie in the Kings pipeline at the moment. So he's 6'6", nicknamed the Swedish Bull by his teammates. So you'd like for the Kings to have something in the pipeline. So obviously I'm rooting for him.
And I have to get you on record for what your feelings are with Brandt Clarke, Jordan Spence, and how that's gonna be handled. Are you, in your opinion?
I wouldn't be shocked either way, right? Like, this is just my own personal thing. But I believe that while Brandt Clarke has a higher ceiling offensively, I feel like he is one-dimensional. May not be the right phrase I want to use, because I don't think there's any critique of his defense. I don't think anybody thinks he's bad defensively. But obviously his strength is this unbelievable offensive output. But if he's going to be playing third pair minutes, I'm not sure how you capitalize on that as much as people want it to be, right? Like, there's not a lot of third pair offensive defensemen out there who are racking up 50, 60, 70 points or whatever it is. Whereas Jordan Spence won't have a higher offensive ceiling. I think his floor might be higher, and I think he might be just a little bit more diverse a player. Plus you factor in their contractual situations. And honestly, I'm just a Jordan Spence homer. I love
I am too, to be honest.
I really like the kid, and I really want him to succeed. Yeah. And if Clarke makes the roster over Spence, I just think it becomes a much more difficult path to incorporate both of them into the future. Having said that, I'm not rooting for Brandt Clarke to not make the roster. I want Brandt Clarke to be the player that everybody is, projecting him to be. I just am not sure. There I am again, not giving you an answer.
Well, it is an exciting time. Obviously, when you're going into a season, everyone's optimistic for the most part, but it's an exciting time for the Kings. There is certainly a bigger spotlight on the team at this point right now because of this global series game in Australia. The games, I believe, are going to be on the NHL Network. You've got this behind the glass docu-series that's coming out that's chronicling this trip again on NHL Network. The Kings are going to be on national TV 16 times. There's only two other teams that have more games on national TV. So certainly it appears that there's an opportunity for the Kings to maybe speak to a bit of a larger audience this year in that regard and get some attention. And clearly some folks think that they're worthy of a team that's interest to people, not just locally, but around the NHL.
The roster they have, I think I probably said this last year, but I think it is double this year. If everything goes right for the Kings this year, they're a cup contender. Last year, I wasn't maybe that confident that they could be a cup contender if everything went right. This year, if the lines click and the defense plays well and the goaltending is solid, I don't see any way that this team isn't a contender. Yeah, not everybody agrees with me. I think Jim Fox, the phrase he uses is they're knocking on the door of contention, but not necessarily there yet. He wants to see it. I say if everything goes right, they are. The flip side of that is if three things go wrong, they could be in serious trouble.
Well, I mentioned the Marco Sturm interview that you had on the All the Kings Men podcast. Anything else coming up that you'd like to share? Anything planned in the near future?
So, this, like I said at the start, it's been a really busy week here. We're, the engines are revving up. We'll be having as much content as we can produce over the next few weeks, getting ready for training camp and for the Australia trip and everything. So nothing specifically on the books that I can tease, but trust that we will be bringing you interviews and audio from the organization. If I could really quickly, though, also plug the Rain Check podcast, where Jared Shaffron and Josh Schaefer interview members of the Ontario Reign coaching staff and players. They've been putting out great stuff all summer. And we also have the LA Kings Insider audio channel. It's not interviews, but it's, when Pierre-Luc Dubois has a media availability, the entire thing winds up on that channel. If we just put up a conversation with Bob Miller and Dustin Brown from last year's Kings Festival, which was for season ticket members only. But if you want to hear Bob Miller interview Dustin Brown for about an hour about his career, that's on the LA Kings audio, LA Kings Insider audio. All of those can be found at lakings.com/podcast. So if you just can't stand the sound of my voice, but you still want to get Kings content, there's more there than just my output.
All right. That is Jesse Cohen. Jesse, good to talk to you again. Looking forward to seeing you out there at crypto.com arena in the near future. And as I said, I know it's a busy time for you, so really appreciate a few minutes, and congratulations on being the host Kings Talk as well. Looking forward to hearing your voice, certainly on the ride home, probably for a lot of people after heading out for a Kings game. So thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Eddie.
All right. Real quick for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch every day, coming up on tomorrow's show, it'll be a very busy show. We're going to recap the Kings' first game at the rookie face-off in Las Vegas as they take on the San Jose Sharks. The Kings are also going to have a media availability on Friday, talk about their trip to Australia. We'll tell you what GM Rob Blake, President Luc Robitaille, and some players have to say about that. And of course, on our Friday show, we always have the fan feedback show, your emails, your comments on the YouTube channels. We'll get your feedback, your questions, your comments on whatever's going on with the LA Kings this past week and our shows. The email address, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. Always leave your comments in the YouTube section as well. And we'd love you to stay interactive with the show by following us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.